Welcome to the Frequency Ma podcast with Sheena Israel and Alyssa Ma. Frequency Ma is a sanctuary for the oracular and the ordinary. We explore the interwoven paths of mothering, embodied business and prosperity, self-creation and relationship, spiritual technologies like channeling and frequency keeping. Expect earth and insights to catalyze your quantum leaps. For the multi-dimensional, multi-passionates, all of you is welcome here. Journey with us. Okay, here we are, episode 4 of the Frequency Ma podcast. Thank you all for being here today, and a warm welcome to Anjelica Orion, who is our second guest on the podcast, and we're so excited to weave with you today, Anjelica. And for those of you who don't know Anjelica, or Nymph Prayer, as she's known on her social channels, she is a keeper of the solar feminine mysteries. She's an ascension and healing arts guide. She's a wife, a mother of 2. She's an advocate for free birth and free schooling, and truly just a poet who plays in a variety of realms. This includes in human design and astrology. I know I've had an oracle reading from you. I think that was our first touch point, was an oracle card spread. And yeah, you really touch into the realms of physiognomy, biogenesis, localism, a lot of big words, but you weave them all together so beautifully, and cannot wait to get into it with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. Like I said, I feel like you two are some of the most mystical women that I know. So I know that you guys will comprehend and have so much to share and add to the things that I want to talk about all the time.
Thank you so much for being here. I also want to just kind of continue along with some of your bio so that we can really kind of map the magnificence and scope of your work, which I feel like is so broad, and yet it kind of hangs together in a way that feels very penetrative and transformative. And I feel like that's part of your medicine, is this like revelator for these times of, evolutionary ascension. And yeah, the specific way that you speak to like the primal male and female relational dynamics without aligning to the religious trad movement, that's a very unique position to map. And I think it will be really interesting to speak into. And then, specifically also, your kind of flagship course around the Maiden Codex, and the course is called Preserving Maiden Architecture. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's what I call it.
Which I think is so in itself, just contemplating that title is a window into the energetics of your kind of core offering. And I hesitate to even say core offering, because I feel like it just is that. It's a doorway into so many other topics that you weave with. And one of the things that I think is unique about your teachings is that they are so very esoteric, and yet there's a way that you shared through your lived experience, through how you physically show up in the digital realms in which we weave, and that's very intimate, and it's domestic, and it's sensual, but it's also very much in that vein of like the expression of logos. So you're creating this experience of order within the Ma frequency. And so it's really, yeah, a joy to have you on, because I feel like you do bring a lot of the kind of structuring elements to the kind of, yeah, shimmering flow that maybe Sheena and I are more, yeah, can maybe sometimes get lost in. So I am excited to have you share about, yeah, specifically, I think we could start off just, could you walk us through how you view this kind of eternal virgin archetype, and what are the primary ways in which you are sharing this preservation of the maiden architecture to mothers?
Yeah, I love how you describe the way that I try to bring order to the Ma frequency, because one of my first really intense initiations to everything that I teach was that I basically got stuck in a hell realm related to my upbringing with Catholicism, and my real, my very sincere desire to express purity from the doctrine that I was taught. And I could never make it make sense, though, in my head, specifically the teachings about gender in Catholicism. And the more that I would try to submit myself mentally to it, the more that I would start to feel my actual reproductive organs as this black hole of pain. And I was I always say that, like, when I get to this point where I'm trying to share sort of the background of this stuff, I just had a very bizarre and eccentric upbringing where it's like there was this strong, like, Catholic rigidity to my life. And then on the other hand, both of my parents have these sort of mystic artist archetypes as well. And these things never fully were able to create a union in the home. And so it left me with these two archetypes in my being of this good girl that really just wants, you know, that virgin energy that just wants to be the good girl and wants to be right in her place and wants to be devotional. And then the part of me that could perceive the genuine meaning behind different doctrines and the actual geometry of things on the higher frequency level. And so what happened was I got stuck there and I became pretty much very mentally ill over it. And a lot of it was coming from ancestral lines from my father's side, because my paternal grandmother was a pretty hopeless hypochondriac and schizophrenic. And she, from a very early age, was basically stuck in a hell realm as well. And then her daughter, my dad's sister, she committed suicide when she was 21. So heavy story that really never, ever got processed. When I was about 18, 19, I just started processing all of these things related to my grandmother and my deceased aunt. And because my father had seen what the medical system had done to his mother, my father, you know, my parents didn't know what to do with me. So they just left me in my room, they just like paid for me to have yoga and massage and like psychotherapy, but they didn't medicate me. But they also didn't really help me because they were still completely indoctrinated. So I was like in my family home processing all of these quite demonic energies related to my religious upbringing that were in my home. And I was kind of stuck in my house with this hell realm, like mental illness going on. But I didn't really consider it a mental illness, and I still don't. But when I'm saying mentally ill, what I'm saying is I was in a state of being addicted to a negative thought form that was all consuming. And that negative thought form was very much related to the emptiness of the feminine and this idea about, well, if the masculine is God and the feminine just receives God and like multiplies God, then like, what am I as a female? What am I as a woman? And this drove me to such a level of insanity because I really actually wanted to submit to what was being presented as this, you know, high level truth, this high logos, where apparently if you submit to it, then like everything comes into order for you. But every time that I fully would be like, okay, what does this mean? If I truly go into that, this was the messages from my actual womb and my body were so painful that I was stuck between this jam where I didn't know what was the right thing to do, to believe in these things that were physically painful to me, or to create my own philosophy, even when like the identity of the female, especially as a philosopher, is like historically laughable. And this is what I was coming up against. Now, how did that lead me to teaching about the eternal maiden? Well, mostly because I was having a confrontation with that aspect of the feminine that really wants to submit, that really deeply just wants to submit in the sense of just opening wide and being hollow and kind of dissolving the identity into that hollowness of the overarching identity of God. And then I had a series of, you know, interactions with men after I got out of that, that led me into, again, a confrontation with like, well, what should you submit to? Like, and like, what happens when you're overly submissive? And like, what, you know, what is godliness in a man? And this led me into tantric arts, and this led me into, you know, experiencing my sexuality over time as understanding the both regenerative and destructive force that it can be. And just being so emotionally consumed in certain like toxic relationships that went on, and the experience of enslaving myself in terms of enslaving my feminine to an unworthy man, or unworthy behavior from a man that could, you know, on many levels was a beautiful soul, but not ready to uphold a godly manhood, right? So then I experienced the end of what I would consider that mental illness. Was actually, it became a physical illness. And so then I got very into healing arts and trying to figure out how to make this sciatic pain in my leg go away. I had very serious pain that I was limping for like over a year of my life when I was just 19, 20. And then I experienced being stuck for a very long time in a high level of pain. And then all of a sudden being able to spontaneously release it from my body at like a level of miraculous healing after a really long time of being stuck. And that experience led me over time to really just have an intimate understanding of the way that negative energies can wash through us and leave. And then my initiation into motherhood, you know, has put me up against, well, you know, there's also the issue of you can only bend so far before you break as well. And so there's this duality between what I know to be possible in terms of the regeneration of the feminine. And it's not just about the physical body, it's also about the reclamation of the sexy muse archetype. It's about the reclamation of the sex goddess, not as this like promiscuous like tease or like succubus, but the reclamation of the sex goddess as a woman who can remain in her bridal state even when she is even when her fertility has been capitalized on, even when her fertility has been brought to fruition. Because, and I'll finish here on this just to open to the topic, my issue is on a moral level. If when we're young and sexy, that's how we attract men, if that makes babies, then like what, and then, you know, the birthing of babies and the mothering of babies diminishes beauty, what is that saying about the maiden's heart? What is that saying about the juiciness of the maiden heart? And that motherhood would actually diminish that to the degree that the body becomes aged. And this is why I feel that exalting and almost deifying the maiden heart is what is important for us to move into a space where sexuality no longer becomes a war, but becomes a regenerative activity for it within a, you know, I teach monogamous matrimony. Like, I understand that doesn't resonate with everybody. That's what I teach. But even taking that out, it's about having a relationship with the young female body where it's not commodified and seen as something that expires, but something that is so sacred that we preserve it even through the mother phase. And that is a combination of community support and cultural transformation. And at the same time, each woman doing her individual work to reclaim and to create the space within her own life to support the eternal maiden, the eternal virgin. So, do you guys have anything to share from this space here?
Just wow. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of every single word, just absolute gold, and such important teachings for this time, because, you know, I think that we tend to so easily kind of collapse with this idea that we are, and this is, you know, this is throughout like all of the kind of, you know, information online that is intended to support mothers. And it's like, and you speak to this so beautifully, but it's like as an ameliorative, you know, tool to help mothers feel seen or heard or held, which we all need to experience. It's like, oh, aging is inevitable. This is the pill that we're offered, is aging is inevitable, and accept your body as it has calcified, as it has become rigid, as it has become, the places it's become flaccid. Like the solution to that is an acceptance of this kind of death march. And so what you're offering with this maiden codex is really this, it's a vibratory frequency that we can take in, and we can vibrate as truth. We can vibrate as truth that we can hold the eternal maiden architecture within ourselves and have access to this regenerative font of well-being that nourishes ourselves, that nourishes our families, and that nourishes our communities. And I love that you speak to the kind of, the specificity in which those types of beliefs kind of become calcified in our systems. And you also offer very specific practices to kind of, break through. So I feel like your work is very esoteric, but also because of all of the ways in which you've been initiated through the experience of physical pain and spontaneous healing and through the birth portal, that there's such grounded wisdom in like the path forward. And I've journeyed, I think it's been twice, through the preserving maiden architecture group
Mm-hmm.
study. So highly recommend
Yes.
it if this is resonating, because it's just such a magical space for really holding these, especially with a group of women who are also like, I choose to believe in biogenesis. I choose to hold as possible that I can reclaim my body, mind, and spirit, and the, coherence therein, through vibrating this belief and through the devotion to not only myself, but also, within the container of relationships. So there's so much overlap into the things that we tend to care about as mothers. And so it's a really beautiful space to kind of tend to painful conflicts with men, the kind of postpartum reclamation, how we mother. So yeah, no, I guess not a question there, but just more of that, please. And maybe how do you see this kind of tying in? This is kind of, specific to the mother, and kind of rectifying that triple goddess archetype that has exclusionarily, kind of said like, okay, you've moved from maiden into mother, now you're in crone, that we have this kind of linear progression, but you're reforming that into this multi-dimensional invitation. And I feel like it's deeply related to kind of what we're up to on the planet right now. And, in this
Mm-hmm.
moment of, centering ourselves in what is possible. It is not here yet. And so we're in this
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Yeah,
tension
it's not
of,
here yet. It's not here yet. And that's like why I actually have a hard time always knowing how to market it, because then you've got the super new agers that are like, all you have to do is envision your 5D self all of the time, and it will just, everything's in the mind. But it's actually not, because we're not just us, right? And this is why I get into the ancestral level of things so much, is that we owe our existence to this thread of ancestral forms. And we can talk about our galactic origins as well. We can talk about our archetypal origins, but the ancestral level is something that we're all carrying like a baggage, that it is something that the art of making it not this heavy baggage anymore is like, that's our initiation. It's not just imagining our higher self all of the time. There's a lot of layers to peel away and feel through. And then there's also what I find is that, so Sheena, I just want to say, did you want to say anything? Because I feel myself about to go off on a tangent.
Go for
So
it.
I was going to segue, but I just want to give you space before I sort
No,
of.
I'm a big fan of tangents. I will weave anything that needs to come through as the opportunity arises. Go for it.
Okay, beautiful. So we can't really achieve any of this if we aren't creating a cultural background and foundation that supports mothers and children. And it's like the way that women have historically interacted with each other, it all sort of just like creates the status quo to remain the same, because we're all dealing with body image problems. We're all dealing with burnout and exhaustion. We're all dealing with the culture not making space for the mother and the sex goddess to be the same thing. And then this one of the other things that this really creates is this creates a situation where the men are fixated on this idea of this like very temporary identity within each woman, meaning that it shouldn't be temporary. But what I'm saying is that it lets men off the hook for the issues around, first of all, their own regenerative aging, but especially their sexual control and attention. Because there's this idea that like, oh, well, men are biologically programmed to only be attracted to women within a 10-year age spectrum. And it's like, okay, we get why that is on the physical level, but why are the women deteriorating so quickly after that? Why are the women deteriorating so quickly after motherhood? And it has a lot to do with how we think about the newly formed young woman about 17. It has a lot to do with how we initiate girls into their womanhood, how we whether we allow teenage sexuality to exist or not, and how we should be dealing with that, in my opinion, is facilitating early marriage. Because like issues around having a lot of partners or having multiple partners, I don't really buy into polyamory personally. Not that we have to get into that at all, but it's just that issues of sexual energy cultivation start to become relevant when you're like 12, 13 years old. And before that, in early childhood, and this is what I want to talk about, the postpartum body, because I'm still reclaiming my body at 16 months postpartum, because I had a very traumatic childhood in terms of the way that my body was, the way that forced modesty was an issue in my family. I never actually got to develop a 7-year-old physique that would have been primally embodied, because I had my parents telling me that I always had to cover up my navel. I couldn't wear belly tops. I couldn't wear bikinis, and like no education about my reproductive organs and like what is a vulva, what is a clitoris, what is a vagina. Like none of these things were supported. So it's like sexual identity starts when you're born, you're a boy or a girl. And like sexual identity has to be nurtured in an age appropriate way. And it's just not. So it's like, I feel that I had, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, I really feel that in America, at least, and in North America, and in Europe, I would say, in the West, we took the taboo off of the woman's belly. Like we took the taboo off of the belly top and the bikini. It was like, nobody is going to be destabilized by, on the cultural level, it became normal for women to just wear bikinis, right? But I was raised in a very religious home where the sexual trauma was deep. And so I really feel that one of the reasons I have diastasis and prolapse is because I never actually got to grow into a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old abdomen. Like I was taught to dissociate from my torso to such a degree. And then in my teen years, always sucking in my belly to look skinnier. So now I have like birth injuries that take a long time to rehab. And I feel good about where I'm at. But at the same time, it's a deep wound that creates this lack of ownership of my own body, right? So with the Maiden Codex, in terms of these abilities that I feel I've accessed a lot of regenerative abilities, but even the mastery that I have of that, where like a lot of people still think I'm a teenager in person, I still have a split stomach that is still hanging off my body a little bit. And, you know, I do have like faith. I feel certain that it will repair itself based on the things I'm doing, but it takes time. And so the process and the pain and the triumph of the process, you know, it's like, it takes the ability to not identify with your appearance first to do this work. And that's what I always say in the Maiden Codex. I'm saying the alignment comes before the aesthetic, because the cosmetic industry really wants us to be so focused on the, you know, external aesthetic that we don't even get to the internal until it's collapsed so much that we don't even have the ability to cosmetically cover it up. That is what people call the initiation into cronehood, is this point where you're like, well, I guess I can't even fake it anymore. I'm just going to let it all hang out. Like, I'm just going to be in myself, right? So this is why I've had several initiations about beauty where I didn't get to enjoy the physical beauty until I was holding the frequency for a very long time. Right around this time where I became super mentally ill, I got quite grotesque acne all over my face. And up until that point in my life, I had never been seen without foundation since I was like 11 years old. So like at that point, I just stopped wearing makeup, and I haven't worn skin makeup since that point. And I just would go in public with this pretty hideous looking face, because my face really was covered in some kind of hideous mask where I had to like just be comfortable. And it was the first time I was fully in my body, because I was just like, well, you know, this is not really like, I don't even need to be seen, or if I am seen, people are going to look away. Like I'm, you know, that just that embracing of that invisibility, it led to eventually I didn't have that acne ever again. And I actually had a really nice clear face that has mostly stayed with me for, you know, many years. I feel like there's so many things that after we do this, I'm going to be like, oh, I forgot to talk about that. That was really important. But let me just look at my notes here. You wanted to talk about the dietary aspect of things. And I would love to share my opinion on this, because it really does become like moralistic for most people about like, you have to either be a vegan, or you have to be a carnivore, or you have to be a breatharian to be this regenerative, like immortalist avatar version of yourself. And the way that I see this is that, to me, the Gaia frequency and what's talked about in the New Age as sort of transitioning from the 3D Earth into the Gaia frequency of Earth, the way that I connect with the Gaia frequency is that it is a perfect symbiosis where you can have autonomy and you can have individual rootedness, and you can also be receiving a steady stream of nourishment. And this is where I feel things go. So people that talk about biogenesis and immortality often have this belief that you have to claim it by becoming one with the great central sun, with the actual sun, that relying on any other element other than your soul that is being sourced from the sun is like a form of human weakness and a form of basically like making a god of another element other than God. This is the idea that you see. And then there's a moralistic hierarchy about like meat versus plant-based foods, with this idea that like plant-based foods vibrate on a higher frequency, so they raise your frequency, and then eventually you can wean yourself off of food altogether when your frequency gets high enough. You have a lot of these little like niches and countercultures that, you know, are really passionate that their way is the only way. And the way that I see it is a lot more flexible, because I don't really just see myself as me and my soul. I also see myself as this, you know, composition of elemental forces that, you know, some are my identity and some don't have to be my identity. And, you know, I can coexist with the symbiosis between all of the rhythms of the elements. That's how I feel it. And so the issue with like meat, for me, you know, if as long as it is raised in what I would say, I don't know if humanistic is the right term, but, you know, as long as you're not interfering with the natural biorhythm of the animal, you know, like when you're raising them, I don't feel that the cycle of life is broken when you consume the meat, because they're taking energy from the sun. The grass is getting energy from the sun. They're consuming the grass. And, you know, if you are a true steward of like a herd of bison, which is what my husband does, it's like that stewardship versus just like the factory farm model. It's so different and it's so wholesome that like the act of hunting and taking the life of the animal and, you know, skinning it and seeing the whole inside of the body and really revering like the beast for what the beast is. I have been around this now for 5 years, and I feel confident in what I'm saying about it. I don't feel that I need to liberate myself from dependence on food to be in a regenerative aging or eventually immortal state, because I really feel that this planet is meant to be immersed in the elemental harmony of things. And, you know, there are other channelers that say this all the time, that this planet and its relationship with the 3D form is why this space is so special, because of the density. And so I feel that having a flexible relationship with density and having an embracing relationship with density and not like shying away from density is how I lead myself. So then the question is, what is being held in the density? Is it pain or is it joy? Is it, you know, and that's where you get into cleaning the body of energies that are too dense, or where the density is compacting something that is draining the life force. But density itself is something that I think has become too much of a like hype in like the new age cult.
Oh, yes. I love that. I think, and when you're centering your teachings in the realm of ascension, I think it's really curious as well to think about density as a means for embodiment, that, when we do kind of give ourselves over to these, moralistic hierarchies of pranic intake, it feels a lot like the kind of traditional religious paradigms that have, enslaved us in various ways. And so it's like we're trying to, deconstruct whatever residue is in our systems from perhaps being raised within those domains, and then finding ourselves in the new age. And then there's this other kind of replicated, hierarchy. And so to me, I love this idea that, the holism, the symbiosis that you are attributing to the Gaian frequency, which is, we can also consider, that the Ma frequency is, deeply entwined with this vibrational, hologram, and the mother desires for our deepest nourishment. And that nourishment can take a variety of forms, right? Like whether our soul is desiring more groundedness through, traveling to density through the, animal medicine, or whether it needs less density. Like there's no one that can tell that story or discern what energetic is needed in the system except the individual. And the understanding that you put forward of yourself as, because you're not identifying your whole beingness with you, Anjelica. You're understanding yourself as part of this human project that is ascending the planetary energies as a collective. And so when we embrace that orientation, then it becomes so much easier to allow nourishment. And I think that's something that we struggle with as women. That's something that I deeply struggle with, is allowing.
Yes. And that, yes. And I really feel that one of the biggest issues, and this might even segue into like our next topic related to this, is that women have been so sheltered from motherhood in this day and age. Like you two are both mothers, and so you understand that it's a flesh bond, But when women, I think, were having more babies as a regular thing, it was just more understood that it's like these children are born of our flesh, and like and I don't really resonate with this idea that like birth is supposed to be ecstatic, orgasmic for every single person. And if you didn't get that, then like you're not with God. I really reject that, because I really think birth is actually gruesome, because there's many aspects of life that are gruesome. And I feel like we are animals. So I just feel like this hierarchy about it, where it's like there's animals and humans, and we're not going to eat animals because we're better than animals, that really doesn't resonate with me, because it feels a little bit out to lunch. But I also think that people are biodiverse, and I don't actually think that everybody has to eat the same amount of meat or the same amount of fruit. And some people can be fine on fruit, or maybe they are fine on fruit for 3 months and they just want to eat raw liver for a month. Like, I really think people are biodiverse. And because I grew up in a family where there was a lot of food addiction and a lot of binge eating in the home that I grew up in, I've so many intuitive eating experiments myself that I just respect that, like, people need to just eat what they want, what they feel is best for them, and just not be too rigid ideologically about food. That's how I feel about it. So, and then there's also the more, it seems kind of fantastical, but then there's the idea of like, okay, well, when you're eating something that is like red dye or like factory farm meat, like how much does your vibration actually change the vibration of the food? And I personally don't really feel like I have that power. but I know that some people do. I know that some people can take this like gas station burger and like bless it and like you know, like I can't really imagine having the power to do that, but I do believe that there are people that can. So did you want to say something, Sheena?
Yeah, I feel like, you know, when we're talking about just the uniqueness of everyone's, like how they're being called to consume, how they're being called to nourish their own bodies, and even on this topic here, like having the gift to, you know, transmute like the Twinkie, for example, right? It's like this, the thing is that comes up for me is that we're all here for a different purpose. We have a different relationship to the elements. We dance with it differently. We have our own uniqueness. And so like what you just said around the gas station food can be applied to also the bison that your husband raised. Is for one person or another. It can be applied to the fruit, the genetically modified fruit, or the not genetically modified. It's our relationship to our pranic intake is so individual. And I really just feel like, you know, a day in the life of like my kitchen and on my plate is going to look very different from a day in the life in your kitchen and on your plate. But I do think that the both are very, 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 like very holy and very intentional. And that's important to just recognize and heal within these like dogmatic and linear approaches to diet, is that we don't have to be one or anything. We are literally all of it, because we are flesh, because we are animal, because we are of Gaia and of all. We are all of it. Therefore, we can use all of it to nourish ourselves deeply, however it is that we need. And no one else is like the judge of that unless we allow them to be. And so I feel like my own relationship with food is like, you know, when in my life have I allowed this person or this ideology or this philosophy to be the judge of me? And reclaiming my own power through that has left me with so much peace and so much freedom. So it's just a beautiful conversation. Yeah.
And listening to you, like as my friend, talk about your relationship with food also really solidified for me my belief that people are biodiverse. Like I tend to feel that most people would be better with like at least some animal foods, but like I just know that isn't true for you. So I just like I respect that, and I can really feel the truth behind it. So I think every time I have this argument with myself in my head versus like the naysayers versus, you know, what do I want to think, is I just think about going outside in the morning and receiving the love of the trees and the sun and the fresh air. And I'm like, how is that any different than like having a piece of chicken on my plate? Like, I just don't really feel like it's any, I mean, every single medicine is different, but it doesn't feel like any kind of moralistic, you know, value is, you know, better than the other. So what I want to really emphasize here, and like motherhood has really initiated me into this piece even more, is just that, for instance, every mother-child relationship is so unique to the point that we have these like ideas of like what is universal. And I do like to uphold some things that I believe are universal, like related to attachment parenting and birth and things like that. But then at the same time, it's like, just like our relationship with nourishment, which is all about the mother, is like you're saying, so intimate and personal. I feel like our disrespect for motherhood in general as a culture and a historical culture is part of what creates these situations where people are just trying so hard to prove that someone else needs to be doing exactly what they're doing. And I feel that right now in my life, creating better circumstances for me to mother in is really important. And I feel like the disrespect of motherhood only comes because women are having less babies than ever. And in some ways that's good. In some ways, for some people, that freedom to not be a mother is really important. But then on the other side of things, I think that it also really has just pushed motherhood into this invisible or like closed off space. And there's not like a practicality of like, well, you know, kids are kids and mothers are mothers and women are women and men are men. And like these practicalities, I feel, are just not held with reverence at all. And that's, I feel like, let me just look at my notes here because I wanted to share some about this, because with the maiden architecture, there's this issue of like, okay, if you're going to preserve the maiden within motherhood, then motherhood needs to be highly revered. It's not, we can't have this relationship with maiden like sexuality where it's like, well, you gave your flower and now your flower is expired. And now you have to nurture these flowers that are your kids. And like, this is your beauty now. Your kids are your beauty now. Mm-hmm. And because this is a female demon. That creates a female demon. It creates a female-based demonic force within a culture that fuels jealousy between women, competition between mothers, and a general lack of the Ma frequency and just all together. Because if we believe that pre-motherhood sexuality is something that you sacrifice, pre-motherhood erotic innocence, beauty, youthful beauty, if we believe that youthful beauty is something you exchange for children, then what are we really saying about what motherhood is and what a child is? What is that creating about the mother-daughter dynamic? And for the sons, if the son, you know, if there's this truth that a little boy, you know, his first love is his mother, like, what if that makes it so that the mother can never let go of the son's admiration and is creating all of these hooks into his energy field? So the way that women create hooks into other women's energy field and other people's energy field, and the way that people are generally afraid of female energy because of the repression of genuine female energy, which is going to be that teenage energy, that energy that is devotional and kind, but also juicy and playful and erotic and sensual and relaxed and buoyant. If we believe that you can only be that way outside of motherhood, then we are desecrating the name of the mother. Mm-hmm. We really are. And so this is why the less that women experience birth directly, this is why I advocate for free birth, because, you know, if you have I know that even in a traumatic birth, that a woman has many opportunities to reclaim her feminine energy. But I will say that the more that we are sheltered or interfered with within our birth experience, the less that we have an understanding of what a primal edge means and what a maternal instinct means and what that means for what respectful behavior between women is and what is respectful behavior in general versus what is fake behavior. And this is why I want to talk about community, And this is what you guys asked, like, what do you want to talk about today? And I was like, this is one of the main things I wanted to talk about, is that there are, because of these issues related to this like firm division between maidenhood and motherhood, issues around how women relate to each other because they don't feel in possession of their own youthful beauty. And maybe you have a trauma where this issue of like, well, I'm only friends with girls that are less pretty than me, or I'm afraid that this woman has this one feature that is this feature that I've always wished I had, and so I'm intimidated by her. These kinds of things, these kinds of body image dysmorphias that are also related to us not having a full permission from the culture to embody our own beauty from a young age. These all create these female demons that actually take away from the children's lives, because you can't create a proper community when you send your kid to someone's house and then they're talking shit about you behind your back, or there's just this unspoken thing that you never can get past or whatever. This is why when we're talking about motherhood, it's like mothers need so much from the culture, but it wouldn't seem like so much if we could just see the mother for what she is, which is a sex goddess. Like, a mother is a sex goddess. There's no denying that. And yet that is the most glaring contradiction across culture for so long. So it's like, I feel that then we get into these things where it's like, okay, well, how do we create something outside of the dominant systems that actually works? And one big idea that I want to share here today is like, what is human scale? Because when we're thinking on the Aquarian level, we're often thinking about the masses, and we're talking about the large group organization. But in reality, on the human level, just like you can only have so many children, right? You can only mother so many children with integrity. You know, if you have kids back to back to back, like, I'm sorry, but like the bond is not going to be as strong as if you're able to like actually give your child a full attention in infancy, right? So just like respecting that motherhood is not a manufacturing plant, that it's an intimate, like, it's an intimate bond that requires so much discernment at every moment and so much primal embodiment, that when you start thinking about reformation on the cultural level, I really am wanting to talk about women going to the base level, which is like you and your kid and what you and your kid need, and what it would look like to have something that's human scale. And I don't want to use this word like too precisely, but the issue of like, you can only really know about 150 people. You know, this idea that like your tribe or your cult, your community can only really function when it's kept to a certain limitation of size. Because once it expands, things just don't function properly because there's not enough cohesion. And what would it look like to have multiple different communities that can all be cohesive? Well, I really believe it would require us to be very exclusive about what we are available for as individuals. And this is where like the food issue comes in, right? Where it's like you have this cultural divide between like vegans and animal-based people. And it's like, well, any serious ideological or moralistic difference of beliefs at some point It might not affect the men because the men are just all doing business together, but it will affect the women and children because the women and children are in the hearth nurturing each other. And if there's not a 100% respect for what another person's alignment is, because it's just too different than your own alignment, then the women and children are not going to be supported. And what have women done for so long? They just have fake relationships with each other, where it's like, yeah, like we can share this space, but I really disagree with this one life choice that you've made, but I'm not going to judge you, but I'm actually judging you. We can't really not judge people. And that's why I feel that people need to be open about what kinds of judgments they're making about what is actually acceptable to them, what's not actually acceptable. And I feel that this is like part of reclaiming the Ma frequency, just like reclaiming the maiden frequency is about being like, what am I available for in my own space? What is my spaciousness going to be taken up with? And what is worthy of that space? What is my personal value about my own space and my child, therefore? So what would be human scale? I don't have a specific number, but I feel that the globalist, it's like a lot of us that are aware of issues on the global scale, sort of like dominating the local scale. We're just thinking a lot of the time in terms of, you know, well, we need to start a revolution where the entire planet will change its frequency. And it's like, actually, we just need to be able to hold a genuine reverent space between like 10 different women in person and like juggle daily responsibilities. That's how I see this point in time, where I feel like women who are mystics, we're always thinking big. And I feel like we need to think more intimate. And then you have to come into that space where a lot of us who are also mystics, we really value compassion and we really value kindness. We really value the gray area. We really value the ability to be accepting and kind to someone, even if they are expressing something that might be we consider it a shadow or something like that, right? And I feel like we actually have to have different kinds of standards. Do you guys want to speak? I feel like I've been speaking this entire time, so I just want to give you guys space.
It's amazing. I love everything you're sharing.
Yeah. It's I do, but I don't want to derail your train of thought.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you're speaking to, you said like when we're speaking to judgment and saying we can't not judge one another, what comes up for me is a conversation that I had with my actual flesh and blood mother, which was around, she has 8 children, plenty. My great great grandmother had 16 children, like a lot. And when we talk about, when I was speaking with her about her kind of relationship between, I have like many younger brothers, and a relationship between my younger brothers and that the relationship that she has with my sister and I, who are older, the eldest two, the relationship is so different. And it's, we've kind of, from my perspective, I won't speak for my sister, but from my perspective, I've always witnessed my mother treating the boys differently, in very, very dramatic ways, but each of them quite uniquely. And I know that on my end, there was never any resentment that came from that, because what I saw her doing was tuning into what each of them needed uniquely, and how there was never a sense of judgment around what each of them needed because of their uniqueness. And this is something, you know, she's on the cusp, Libra Scorpio, so she kind of has that kind of, those energies playing in her field anyway. So it's quite natural for her to just be deep into like almost like enmeshed in relationship. But when we're speaking to judgment and bringing in the ma frequency, and what wants to come through me now is that I feel that we can not judge. I feel that it is a higher level of mastery to come into a position where and maybe it is through becoming mother, or maybe it is through deepening our relationship with individuals and with our sisters and brothers and mothers and fathers and all of this. But I do feel that we can come into right relationship with one another that honors each other's uniqueness without needing to judge one another, and without needing to have this like, I really disagree with your life choices, but we can hang out, that kind of, this kind of, I'm not saying that directly to you, by the way, I think you know that, but like, just, I think that we can have relationships without judgment. And I feel that I'm repeating myself here. I feel that it is through this understanding that we are each very unique. And when we celebrate that uniqueness, and when we celebrate, ourselves and our beauty and our uniqueness, and we are allowed to really embody that, it doesn't matter so much like if we're different from one another. It doesn't matter if we have the same belief system, or the same food on our plate, or the same kinds of clothes, like and I understand too, like when we get into the levels of mysticism versus practicality, I feel that we can come into this level of mastery that is like an in breath and an out breath, where it's not one or the other. It's I'm breathing in and I'm taking all of this in, and I am expanding, and then there's a contraction where I am going deep within and tuning into everything that I am feeling from any particular interaction. And even if that is bringing up shadow for me, but that shadow, or that unconscious that is coming up for me, is for me to resolve and not to project onto another person. And I feel like that's where judgment comes in. It comes in from this projection. It's like, oh, I'm having this uncomfortable experience within myself, and I'm going to blame somebody else, or I'm going to say it's coming from them, or it's coming from outside of me, when really it's an inner resonance that I need to harmonize within myself. And I just, the idea of being in community, 150 people, 200, whatever it is, and everybody willing and devoted to this level of mastery, it's like, it kind of blows my mind to think of whether or not that's possible, right? Because my human mind's like, probably not, but my heart says yes, that's what I want.
Well, one thing that I did once is I lived at the farm commune, Ina May Gaskin's farm commune, and I actually observed this like commune energy that, the farm commune was like one of the biggest like successful communes that still exists from the 60s. And like, honestly, there were so many dark social energies going on there, because, and this is why I feel strongly about this, but I don't want to put down what you're saying, because first of all, like, that's why I feel like I could share a community in person with you, Sheena, even though we have differences, because I know that you genuinely dwell in just that space of like not really wanting to like pin someone down energetically that way. But that's why I also feel that aspect, that's like an archetypal frequency of the Ma, but it's only, I feel that aspect has been overemphasized in spiritual culture. And that's why I'm more focused on the more primal aspect of it that is like protective, because I also personally, like, I have judgments of people, but like, I really do always, I have never been my entire life someone to be like, F you. Like, I've never been someone like that. But when I sense energies that I feel are dark, I don't assume they're me projecting them. I really do digest them, and then I think about them, and I feel that that's like a natural organic warning system for me. But I still see people, because I have been through so many phases of behavior in my life, that I know that when people are disconnected from themselves, that they do things that other people might find really negative. Like, I know that from myself. So I'll never like 100% judge someone at, the ultimate level. But what I'm talking about is an issue of like, okay, so like someone that you're relying on to play a role in the community, and let's say they're always late, or they're always like, they're not fulfilling, they're not being accountable, right? Like at a certain level, at a certain point, I feel if someone has a pattern of not being accountable, you have to create a territorial boundary to preserve the space. And that is the archetype of the Ma frequency that I have just leaned into because of my personal experiences. It's not just a defense mechanism in terms of like being closed off in the heart center. It feels more of like a genuine shield. And I'm just talking about the issue on the community level, where the standards that we're holding on a community level, someone like you that is incredibly self-aware and incredibly understanding of others, you can not be in that judgmental space. But that's just not everyone is there. Not everyone has that character development. So that's what I'm saying is like, when we're talking about the territorial aspect of the Ma frequency and how it relates to the maiden in terms of preserving her, and the mother also in making her life supported. That's what I'm talking about. But I also am always playing between these two aspects, because I have a therapist in me too that is like, yeah, I can totally understand why you like stole someone's car. Like, I get it. Like that is how like I am. Like, yeah, I get why you like went to prison. Like, I get what, like I am someone that is very open-minded about a spectrum of behaviors that people would call bad behaviors, and very patient with those things. And that's why I'm saying I'm actually really feeling for myself right now as well, that if we're going to manifest these communities where the mothers are really supported, I feel like we kind of have to embrace the exclusivity of it as well, because of the issue of if everyone is getting an equal, place at the table, then pretty soon, like, you won't even be able to see another person across the table because the table will be too big. That's where I'm coming from with it. But that's why I am here with you guys, like, because I love you guys, even though we have differences. Like, I don't feel that any of us would be judging each other for choices that we're making with our kids or whatever, right? Because
Right.
But not everyone is like that. Not everyone's capable of that.
And I think we all hold the Ma frequency and at different, as you were saying, you were kind of like oscillating, right? It's like between these two different frequencies, and I feel that each of us do that often. Like that is the sort of, I don't know, mutability of the Ma, is because the mother does tend to many children, and each of those children are unique, and so therefore we must be able to to be nurturing and supportive to each one of those like unique expressions. And so I do hear what you're saying, and I think that what this exchange here, just like this little exchange brought forward for me, is just the idea of how language can really get us caught up in like a specific linear example when I'm speaking quite broad and you're speaking quite broad, and because I spoke to judgment, therefore you were able to refine even further the holisticness of what you're coming across with. And I think that's so
Yeah.
it's good. It's really good.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see what time it is. Are there any, I don't have to go right away, but I feel like maybe like 5-10 minutes. So I'm curious, like if there's anything that we didn't talk about. Let me see what I wrote here.
Just on that topic, I didn't cue into the judgment piece at all when you were speaking, but more into just the project of community building. Like this is something that is so materially important to mothers, and it's also part of that responsibility for planetary ascension, is that we turn the inward focus toward what do I need, what do my children need. And I feel it, this like, you know, when you're speaking, this like geometries of resonance and these kind of spherical structures, and it's like, you know,
Yes.
energies floating towards one another, and they will end up being, you know, sort of roughly of that size. And they're, you know, while our kind of prior templates for community building, you know, I can specifically source that from like the corporate structure, right? You want to have a shared ethos, you want to have, you know, core values that each employee exemplifies, right? But this is so much more intimate because it's not just, you know, you're getting on your clothes, getting in your car and going to your job, and you can, you know, perform in that way, in that context, but it's the intimacy of sharing living space. It's just curious to me to kind of vibrate that into being by attuning to our desire for that. So like really just acknowledging, like, I desire to live in a closer knit in-person community where I am supported and where there are shared values, and there isn't this constant renegotiation of like, so I feel you on the dietary stuff, you know, it's like the kind of material reality of like what happens on Monday and what happens on Tuesday, and having to go, oh, well, this person thinks that my kid should be reading by now, and they're, you know, they are going to subtly, you know, pressurize and shame them because they have a different, you know,
Or like plastic. Like I know some people who are like, literally, if you have a plastic water bottle, you're out. Like, no, like, and it's like, I just like, I don't like plastic, but like, I don't like swear plastic out of my life, right? But it's like, this is what I'm talking about. And okay, so like, I want to say, I really actually feel like it's a really beautiful thing to bring up, that the reason that the Ma, I feel, can become the martyr so easily is because of the compassionate, non-judgmental aspect of the Ma. And then the birth wisdom that I feel that especially you access in the free birth, or any territorial thing that goes on for you, is like what people call the bitch, but it's like, I have never resonated with being a bitch. I'm really actually not good at being a bitch. Like, I'm very bad at coming up with any kind of like witty thing to like disqualify someone. I've never been like that. I've always been friends with people like that. I remember my yoga teacher said once that like, when you wave at someone on the street, there's two kinds of people. If they don't wave back at you and you wave at them, there's two kinds of people. One says, oh my gosh, like, do they not like me? And the other one says, what an asshole. And I was like, I have always been the one that would be like, oh my gosh, they don't like me. Like, I'm so embarrassed. Like that kind of thing. I don't really have the nature to be the other way. And that's actually why I have felt such a descending into this more positive vibration of primality is, and why I feel like the issue with birth and the issue of like no one's hands belong inside my body when I'm giving birth. No one's hands belong inside my body when I'm laboring, you know, this kind of thing. No one should be like holding my baby after birth. Like this territorial aspect of the Ma frequency is what I feel we need to embrace as something that's not unspiritual, that is still a heart-centered thing, and it's a self-preservation thing. It's not a closed heart thing, but it is a sort of, it creates a protective barrier between your territory and someone else's territory. And that's what the menstrual cycle is too. The literal bleeding is a marking of territory. And this is why, like, there's this question of like, well, who could I share space with in my house versus like really couldn't share space with them in my house other than as a guest. Like, who is a guest versus like who is welcome here all the time for real. And I think that the more like the less dense version of the Ma frequency is very like we are all one and we're in its unity consciousness. And then what I'm saying is that when that crystallizes down to the physical form, actually I have my body, I have my blood. It's going to be like dripping all over the place soon. And these babies were born from my blood. And it's just like the territorial elements of sex and birth and the mother is what I want to figure out how to have without these undercurrents of just like fakeness between women. And that's why I'm saying like I'd rather lose a friend than have a fake friend. And I'm saying that on the level of like building an Aquarian style world of community, I feel like more than ever we actually need that. And not to be a bitch about it, just be like, I'm really sorry, like this is what I'm available for, and I'm you know, like just being very clear about standards is what I'm saying. So but yeah, not everyone is as like authentically non-judgmental as Sheena. Like Sheena is such a special person for that.
I think I'm like
thank you.
Go ahead. Sorry, Sheena.
I just was going to offer reflection of the same, so go for it. You can speak.
I'm just really seeing that weaving of the judgment piece that you cued in on, Sheena, and then like the territorial boundary aspect. And it's like the non-judgment is of that like holy desire. And it's like, it doesn't need to be evidenced. If I don't want to be around, and if I'm in my primal state and I do not want to be around meat eaters, or I don't want to be around, you know, insert X, like people who are not free schoolers, like we don't have to moralize that. It is just is. It does not exist in the moral universe. It exists as a primal expression, and it doesn't have to fight to be honored, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, we don't need to apologize for it. I think when you're talking about all of this, of course, my mind is saying like, all right, so we are running out of time here, so we're going to have to pick this up again because to go deeper in it, it's really interesting. But there's a couple of things that I want to share before you leave. And the first one is on this topic, on the communities and that sort of protection, and in the way that Alyssa also just reframed it beautifully, is that you're such an activator, like your fire and passion for this just reminded me of something that I said, and like a statement that I'm like trying to live by and embody through my own presence. That when Alyssa and I did our first episode, which we didn't air because I don't know, did it not record properly? I don't remember what it was. Our first pancake, whatever that was. But I had said, like, my well-being is non-negotiable. And I think that that
Yes.
is also what you're saying as well. And as you speak into it, like I am a visionary, and that's okay. There's a place for a visionary. There's also a place for this like protective energy, and we can also be all of it. The Ma is all of it. There is no hierarchy with her expression. All of it is necessary. And as you're speaking into it, I'm reminded of like that protective nature of the mother, and like I'm honoring that transmission through you, because I need to be reminded of that too. And even in my own mothering, I have had that. Like, you are not coming in to my child's sphere. That's not happening. And maybe I didn't say it that way. Maybe I just slowly stopped being around those people or that environment. Or maybe it wasn't so slow, but I do feel that deeply. And so thank you for the reminder of your well-being, my well-being. All of our well-being is non-negotiable. We get to be well. And
Yes.
then the other thing is, when you were speaking about the maiden architecture and how, and you had mentioned like the bridal body or whatever, I think that's what you said. I was just deeply feeling how medicinal that frequency of the maiden is, and how medicinal the frequency of the even just speaking, through your words and saying that the mother is a sex goddess. That's medicine to my body to hear that.
Yeah, that's
Even
so
if I
beautiful.
would
We
have
need to
that.
say it more.
Yeah.
You know,
Go for it.
this is kind of how I want to finish this, I think, because it's like a big thing that I haven't even said, but it's like coming together right now, where it's like, because when you were describing just like your connection with what it would mean to have that like primal protection, I experienced an even more initiation into this when my first son became a toddler. And there was this father-son dynamic where I always felt that I was being put between the two of them. And I felt that it was a very difficult thing. We went through several conflict cycles about it. And now I feel pretty sure that our future children will not experience this type of like fathering that was going on. But it put me up against the maiden and the mother. And what I found, and this is what because of the issue of like, am I supposed to just be the good just allow this to happen? Or am I supposed to choose my child over my child's father? And this was a conflict that we were going through quite intensely for a good year, I would say. And it doesn't happen anymore. And my husband, because of my like initiation into like, well, what is the right thing to do right now? I really feel that what a wife is the true union of the maiden and the mother. That is what a wife is. And speaking from a wifely authority is having both of these archetypes in their proper places. And that is what I experienced. That was quite difficult when my son got into that toddler stage. And you guys know we live in a place that has like a very intense winter, so there's like cabin fever with toddlers is like its own hell realm. But that was just an initiation that I had, and I just wanted to share that about like wife. And even if you're not a wife, the issue of like the marriage of the sex goddess before motherhood versus after motherhood, and just the understanding of authority there, and the understanding of like you shouldn't have to be in a position where you're defending your child from their father, right? And I feel that before feminism, women didn't really, I don't think that women really were defending their children to the fathers. It's like only when you have a value of the woman's voice and the woman values her voice enough to speak to exactly what is the heart of the matter and exactly what is at stake. Only when you have that womanly confidence can you really play the proper role of using the woman's voice truly. So I guess I want to end there, just because when you were describing that, I was just thinking about like how that is another aspect of what has drained women over time in history, is the inability to have status with the voice within motherhood. That is what is really important. So I think I'll stop there, but thank you for listening to me and my endless my endless ideas. And yeah, I do private study and group study. I have a lot less time now that I have 2 kids to fit that in, but I'm doing a workshop model at the moment where it's just like a one-time thing where you can show up just whenever you want to come to the topic. And then I have the Maiden architecture program, and that is something that is a 6-week program. And then I do private and group study, and I have the classes on my website that are classes I taught on one-time topics when I was pregnant with my second. And what else? I can't think of anything else, but I have lots of free content, as you guys know. Would you guys like to have any comments or questions?
We will definitely link. That was going to be my question, is where can people find you? And so we'll be sure to link your YouTube,
Yeah,
your
well,
Instagram, and your website.
I lost my old Instagram account, which is really like a beautiful relic of my poet side, which I sort of stepped away from in my pregnancy with Withering. And I haven't really come back to it, but on my website, on my Instagram that I'm on now, it's nymph.prayer, but my old account can still be accessed. So if you're curious about, the body of work that I've created, you can scroll endlessly on my Nymph Prayer account. And then I have the nymph.prayer now that I moved from now. And then I have a link tree there to YouTube and my website. So and my Substack.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. I am so honored to be with you guys today. And I just, like I said, I told my husband, I was like, I don't know, I'm having a podcast with some of the most mystical women that I possibly have ever met. So I'm just like, it's going to be the most esoteric podcast of all time.
I feel like it was very grounded. Everything is grounded and beautiful. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Anjelica.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
I'm gonna hit the